Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Gil Scott-Heron, an American jazz poet, singer, musician, and author, was known for his work as a spoken word performer. He teamed up with musician Brian Jackson to blend jazz, blues, and soul with lyrics that tackled the social and political issues of the time, delivered through a mix of rapping and melodic singing. He called himself a bluesologist, a term he coined to describe someone who studies the roots of the blues. Gil Scott-Heron was born in Chicago, and his mother, Bobby Scott, originally from Mississippi, was an opera singer who performed with the Oratorio Society of New York. His father, Gil Heron, known as the Black Arrow, was a Jamaican footballer who made history in the 1950s as the first black player for Celtic FC in Glasgow, Scotland. When Gil was a child, his parents separated and he went to live with his maternal grandmother, Lily Scott, in Jackson, Tennessee. After his grandmother passed away when he was 12, he moved to the Bronx to live with his mother. He initially attended DeWitt Clinton High School, but later transferred to the Fieldston School after catching the attention of the head of the English department with his writing. He earned a full scholarship to the prestigious school. At Fieldston, Gil was one of just 5 black students and faced alienation and the stark realities of a socio-economic divide. During his admissions interview, when asked how he'd feel seeing a classmate in a limousine while he walked away from the subway, he replied, "Same way as you. Y'all can't afford a limousine. How do you feel?" This unflinching honesty and wit would later define his work as an artist and activist. After finishing high school, Gil Scott-Heron chose to attend Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, inspired by Langston Hughes, his greatest literary influence, who was an alumnus. At Lincoln, he met Brian Jackson, and together they formed the band called Black and Blues. After 2 years, Scott-Heron took a break from school to write 2 novels, The Vulture and The Blank Factory. I can't say the full title of that second one, but for those of you who are watching can look it up. Scott-Heron was deeply influenced by the Black Arts Movement, BAM. In 1969, he saw the Last Poets perform at Lincoln, and after the show, he asked member Abiodun Oyewole, "Can I start a group like you guys?" He eventually moved back to New York City, settling in Chelsea, Manhattan. In 1970, his debut novel, The Vulture, was published to positive reviews. Though he never finished his undergraduate degree, Scott-Heron was accepted into the Writing Seminars program at Johns Hopkins University, where he earned an MA in creative writing in 1972. His master's thesis was titled Circle of Stone. Around the same time, he began teaching literature and creative writing as a full-time lecturer at the University of the District of Columbia, then Federal City College, in Washington, D.C., while also pursuing his music career. Gil Scott-Heron kicked off his recording career in 1970 with the album Small Talk at 125th and Lenox. Produced by Bob Thiele of Flying Dutchman Records, the album featured Scott-Heron performing alongside Eddie Knowles and Charlie Saunders on conga, with David Barnes contributing percussion and vocals. The album's 14 tracks tackled hard-hitting themes like the superficiality of television, mass consumerism, the hypocrisy of some self-proclaimed revolutionaries, and the struggles of inner-city life often overlooked by the white middle class. One standout piece was the spoken word poem Whitey on the Moon. In the liner notes, Scott-Heron credited a diverse range of influences including Richie Havens, John Coltrane, Otis Redding, Billie Holiday, Langston Hughes, Malcolm X, Nina Simone, and his longtime collaborator Brian Jackson.
Poem said, "A rat done bit my sister Nell with Whitey on the moon, and her face and arms began to swell, and Whitey's on the moon. I can't pay no doctor bills, but Whitey's on the moon. 10 years from now, I'll be paying still while Whitey's on the moon. You know the man just upped my rent last night? Because Whitey's on the moon. No hot water, no toilets, and no lights, but Whitey's on the moon. I wonder why he's upping me. Because Whitey's on the moon? I was already giving him $50 a week, and now Whitey's on the moon. Taxes taking my whole damn check. The junkies make me a nervous wreck. The price of food is going up. And as if all that crap wasn't enough, a rat done bit my sister Nell with Whitey on the moon. Her face and arms began to swell, and Whitey's on the moon. Was all that money I made last year for Whitey on the moon? How come I ain't got no money here? Whitey's on the moon. You know, I just about had my fill of Whitey on the moon. I think I'll send these doctor bills, air mail special, to Whitey on the moon.
In 1971, Scott Heron shifted toward more traditional song structures with his album Pieces of a Man. Once again produced by Thiel, the album featured Jackson, conductor Johnny Pate, bassist Ron Carter, drummer Bernard Purdy, guitarist Burt Jones, and flutist/saxophonist Hubert Laws. It marked a departure from the raw spoken word style of his debut. His third album, Free Will, released in 1972, saw the return of Jackson, Purdy, Laws, Knowles, and Saunders, alongside new collaborators like bassist Jerry Jamot, guitarist David Spinazza, and arranger/conductor Horace Ott. Reflecting on Scott Heron's unique vocal style, Ron Carter stated, "He wasn't a great singer, but with that voice, even a whisper could be dynamic. It was a voice suited for Shakespeare." In 1974, Gil Scott-Heron teamed up with Brian Jackson again to record Winter in America, featuring Bob Adams on drums and Danny Bowens on bass. Many critics consider this album their most artistic collaboration. The following year, the duo released Midnight Band, The First Minute of a New Day. That same year, Scott Heron put out the single Johannesburg, a powerful anthem calling for the end of apartheid in South Africa. In 1983, the song was reissued as a 12-inch single alongside Waiting for the Axe to Fall and B-Movie. Scott Heron's 1976 live album, It's Your World, and his 1978 spoken word project, The Mind of Gil Scott-Heron, continued to showcase his talent. He also found commercial success with the single Angel Dust, produced by Malcolm Cecil, which climbed to number 15 on the R&B charts in 1978. In 1979, Scott Heron performed at the No Nukes concert at Madison Square Garden, organized by musicians United for Safe Energy in response to the 3 Mile Island nuclear accident. His song, We Almost Lost Detroit, inspired by an earlier nuclear incident, was featured on the No Nukes concert album and shared its title with a book by John G. Fuller. Around this time, Scott Heron became an outspoken critic of President Ronald Reagan and his policies. During the 1980s, Scott Heron released 4 albums, 1980 and Real Eyes, both in 1980, Reflections in 1981, and Moving Target in 1982. Tenor saxophonist Ron Holloway joined Scott Heron's band in 1982, touring extensively and contributing prominently to tracks like Fast Lane and Black History/The World on Moving Target. Holloway stayed with Scott Heron until 1989 and later featured him on his albums Scorcher in 1996 and Groove Update in 1998. By 1985, Scott Heron's relationship with Arista Records ended and he stopped recording new material, although he continued to tour. That same year, he co-wrote and sang on Let Me See Your ID for the Artists United Against Apartheid album Sun City. The track drew new parallels between racial tensions in the US and apartheid in South Africa, famously stating, "The first time I heard there was trouble in the Middle East, I thought they were talking about Pittsburgh." In 1993, Scott Heron signed with TVT Records and released Spirits, which included the iconic track Message to the Messengers. Widely regarded as a founding father of rap and political hip-hop, Scott Heron used this song to urge younger rappers to focus on creating meaningful, socially conscious art rather than perpetuating negative stereotypes. Reflecting on the state of hip-hop in the 1990s, he said, "They need to study music. I played in several bands before I began my career as a poet. There's a big difference between putting words over some music and blending those same words into the music. There's not a lot of humor. They use a lot of slang and colloquialisms, and you don't really see inside the person. Instead, you just get a lot of posturing. That quote resonates with me because I'm sure anyone can see how genuine and thoughtful he is here. The man is truly a genius writer who is both firm in his beliefs and captures his commitment to artistry and authenticity. He shows that he wasn't just a critic, but someone who cared deeply about the evolution of music and culture. His emphasis on blending lyrics into music rather than simply layering them reflects his nuanced understanding of composition and his desire for music to convey something meaningful.
Whether you're on a tour of Washington, let me tell you, those tours are always the same. They bring you around to places like this. They might even tell you who the jackass is on the horse or the guy up on top of the building, but they never show you the real Washington. You should have been around maybe the 15th of January. That's when Stevie Wonder was holding this rally. It was about 50,000 people gathered there. They were trying to demonstrate and make Dr. King's birthday a national holiday. But it's always the same. The Capitol, the Hoover Building. Maybe sometimes they would even show you the Washington Monument. But that's not a look at the real Washington. The one I'd like to show you is something special. You want to see what's happening in the nation's capital? Come with me. I can't imagine being anyone other than who I am. But I don't think that, that makes as much difference as it used to. I went to Fieldston, the Fieldston Schools of Ethical Culture. I've had a very unique experience. I was the first black student to go to a white school in Tennessee. I went to Tigard Junior High School when I was like 13 years old. This was during the integration period when they were just starting to integrate the schools in Western Tennessee. I went from there to the Bronx and went to a multi-ethnic, multi-racial school, junior high school, Creston Junior High School, where they were like all boys. Then I went to Clinton. There were 8,000 boys there. Then I went to Fieldston, where I was one of only 5 black students. I went to Lincoln University, where I was one of the only people who'd ever gone to school with white folks. And then I got my master's from Johns Hopkins, where I was just about the only black person in Baltimore. So from those situations there, I think I've had a very well-rounded sort of education, at least.
In 2001, Gil Scott-Heron was sentenced to 1 to 3 years in a New York State prison for cocaine possession. While out of jail briefly in 2002, he made a guest appearance on Black Alicious' Blazing Arrow album. He was released on parole in 2003, the same year I was born. No, the same year the BBC aired the documentary Gil Scott-Heron, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised, which is also his most popular poem/song. During the editing of the film in October 2003, Scott-Heron was arrested for possession of a crack pipe, which led to a 6-month prison sentence. On July 5, 2006, Scott-Heron was sentenced to 2 to 4 years in prison after violating a plea deal on a drug possession charge by leaving a rehabilitation center. He claimed he left because the facility failed to provide him necessary HIV medication, a claim that led to widespread speculation about his health, later confirmed in a 2008 interview as being HIV positive. Initially set to serve until July 13, 2009, Scott-Heron was paroled early on May 23, 2077, dude. 2007. Following his release, Scott-Heron returned to performing, starting with a live show at SOB's in New York on September 13, 2007. During the performance, he announced he was working on new music and resuming his long-paused memoir, The Last Holiday, which recounts Stevie Wonder's efforts to make Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday a national holiday. Scott-Heron inspired other artists, including Malik Al-Nasir, who dedicated a poetry collection titled Ordinary Guy to him. One of the poems, Black and Blue, was recorded by Scott-Heron in 2006. In April 2009, poet Lem Sissay presented a BBC Radio 4 documentary titled Pieces of a Man, which featured an interview with Scott Heron and marked his first public announcement of a new album. Later that year, the BBC's Newsnight aired a feature, The Legendary Godfather of Rap Returns. Around the same time, a new website, GilScottHeron.net, was launched, offering fans a free download of a track titled Where Did the Night Go? In 2010, Scott Heron faced backlash for scheduling a performance in Tel Aviv, Israel. Pro-Palestinian activists compared the event to performing in Sun City during South Africa's discriminatory era. In response to the criticism, Scott Heron canceled the show altogether. On February 9, 2010, Gil Scott-Heron released I'm New Here, his first studio album in 16 years, through the dependent label XL Recordings. Produced by XL's owner, Richard Russell, the album marked a bold return for Scott-Heron. Recording began in 2007, but most of the album was completed during the year leading up to its release, with engineer Lawson White at Clinton Studios in New York. Running 28 minutes across 15 tracks, the album includes a mix of songs and spoken word interludes, capturing candid asides and reflections from the recording sessions. I'm New Here received widespread critical acclaim. Jude Rogers of The Guardian called it one of the best of the next decade, praising its raw and intimate delivery. NPR's Will Hermes shared his initial skepticism about comeback albums, but admitted to being haunted by the record, describing it as honest and unflinching, yet not without hope. He wrote, "He's made a record not without hope, but which doesn't come with any easy or comforting answers. In that way, the man is clearly still committed to speaking the truth." Darren Lee of OMH offered a slightly more reserved review, applauding the album's emotional impact, but nothing that its brevity prevented it from reaching unassailable masterpiece status. In a 2010 interview with The New Yorker, Scott Heron reflected on the creative process behind the album, saying, "This is Richard's CD. My only knowledge when I got to the studio was how he seemed to have wanted this for a long time. You're in a position to have somebody do something that they really want to do, and it was not something that would hurt me or damage me. Why not? All the dreams you show up in are not your own." In 2011, a remix album titled We're New Here was released, featuring English musician Jamie XX's reimagined versions of tracks from the original album. Like its predecessor, the remix project was met with critical praise. Gil Scott-Heron passed away on May 27, 2011 in New York City, shortly after returning from a trip to Europe. In a 2008 interview with New York Magazine, he revealed that he was HIV positive and had previously been hospitalized for pneumonia, confirming long-standing speculation about his health. Scott-Heron left behind a complex legacy and a loving family. He was survived by his children, Rakia Nia Kelly Heron, his firstborn with writer Pat Kelly, his son Rumal Rackley from his relationship with Lerma Rackley, his daughter Gia Scott-Heron from his marriage to actress Brenda Skies, and his youngest daughter Chejiana Newton, who was just 13 at the time of his passing. He is also survived by his sister Gail, his brother Dennis, who once managed his career, his uncle Roy Heron, and his nephew Terrence Kelly, also known as Mr. Cheeks of the hip-hop group Lost Boys. Before his death, Scott-Heron had been collaborating with Portuguese filmmaker Pedro Costa, discussing roles as a screenwriter, composer, and actor for Costa's film Horse Money. Tributes poured in following the news of his passing. Chuck D of Public Enemy wrote on Twitter, "Rip GSH, and we do what we do and how we do because of you." Jamie Bing, his UK publisher, called him one of the most inspiring people I've ever met. Usher honored him by saying, "I just learned of the loss of a very important poet. R.I.P. Gil Scott-Heron. The revolution will be live." Richard Russell, who produced Scott Heron's final album, described him as a father figure of sorts. Even Eminem himself credited Scott Heron as a foundational influence on hip-hop, and Lupe Fiasco penned a tribute poem in his honor. Scott Heron's memorial service was held on June 2, 2011 at Riverside Church in New York City. Kanye West performed Lost in the World and Who Will Survive in America, two tracks from My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, which include a spoken word excerpt by Scott Heron. He was laid to rest at Kensico Cemetery in Westchester County in New York. In 2012, the National Academy of Recording Arts and Sciences, NARAS, posthumously honored Scott Heron with a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. The nomination came from Charlotte Fox of the Washington, D.C. NARAS with a supporting letter from Grammy-winning artist Bill Withers. Scott Heron's memoir, The Last Holiday, was published in January 2012. In her review for the Los Angeles Times, Lionel George noted that the book captures not only Scott Heron's life, but also the broader American cultural landscape from the Jim Crow era to the Ronald Reagan years. She described it as an episodic and reflective akin to oral storytelling, offering a deeply personal and non-linear account of his journey. Thank you so much for watching. This video took a lot of time to make, so I would really appreciate it if you would leave a like and subscribe. And please make sure to turn on that notification bell so you don't miss a future upload. More quality videos like this one coming soon. Once again, I really appreciate you, and I'll see you next time.